hand over to Tabusam Ahmed, who's the Unite Regional Officer for London and Eastern Region's Lead Officer on Health. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm not sure if I stand up, will it still be?
Yeah. Okay, that's better. I can see everyone. Well, good evening, everyone, and it's nice to see so many faces. I've been covering the health sector as a Unite Regional Officer for the past 5 years, and I've noticed firsthand what it's like for health workers working in wholly owned subsidiaries or arm length bodies or subcos. There's all these various different names, and for me at first that was very confusing, and I thought, what are these entities? And it came quite clear to me that we've got to be absolutely clear that the decision to move towards subcos, arm length bodies, was to drive down costs and make profits, in particular at the cost of workers, by driving down pay terms and conditions. And I don't accept any other reason, the VAT reason or anything else. It's about them driving costs down and potentially bringing money in because there's no investment in the NHS. This mentality, I feel, has changed the way people manage and deliver a service. Health workers are now expected to do more for less. So these entities, as Rathi had said, employ workers like domestic workers who are now expected to cover more wards. They also employ porters, expected to transfer more patients in a smaller amount of time, and pathologists in particular, because although we spoke about the lower paid workers, we have seen a huge move towards pathologists being moved into wholly owned subsidiaries. And I'm going to be talking about one of them. Now, these subcos also attract workers from the private sector whose work is driven by delivering a service with less money and increasing profit. And what this does is it takes away the human side of management. Historically, public services focus on serving the public and you look after your staff, but is completely taken away. As a worker, you are now just viewed as a machine who needs to deliver. Managers use bullying tactics, favoritism, and instill fear to run the services now. Because of cuts and a lack of investment over decades, this mentality has unfortunately is trickled into the mainstream of the NHS. It's like an infestation, and that's how I see it. Because we never used to see managers behaving in that way, and I feel there's an increase in across the NHS. So, we need to really think about that and how subcos are actually affecting the whole deliverance of the NHS. It's not just about subcos, we've got to look at the wider picture. Now, I'm going to talk about 2 disputes that I've been involved in. The first one is East and South East London Pathology in 2023-2024. This is a wholly owned subsidiary of Bart's Trust. And although these workers are on NHS pay terms and conditions, they were now having their contracts and the way they worked completely changed. And I feel like they've been very clever, these wholly owned subsidiaries, saying, well, you're still on NHS pay terms and conditions, what's the problem here? But what they were proposing was to change people's shifts. So instead of having set shifts like day shifts or night shifts, they've been asked to work any shift. You could be doing 2 days of a night shift, 2 days of a day shift. They were asked to change the where they worked on a daily or weekly basis over 5 or 6 different sites. So it was Lewisham, the Royal London, Newham, Walthamstow. So they could be asked to move anywhere. And they were asking them to have a mandatory requirement to cover emergency cover with no compensation, amongst a whole list of other issues. Now, management justified this by highlighting they needed to work more effectively and reduce costs, but didn't highlight that the real reason was that there had been no investment in those services. There was a high turnover of staff due to high workload levels. People were exhausted. People were not being able to progress, and ultimately people were fed up, and they just had enough and thought, I might be able to go somewhere else and it might be better. But sadly, this seems to be the picture in a lot of the pathology services now being delivered. So the changes that ESL were trying to make meant that workers had no consistency in the pattern of work they did, which particularly affected people with carers' responsibilities, and particular women. It is important to point out that these workers didn't highlight their issues until Unite members were out on strike because of pay and safer staffing in 2023. They were empowered to see their colleagues out there and suddenly felt that, okay, we might be able to make change happen here. So we then progressed to recruiting reps, we organised, and members were out on strike with their colleagues with the trust because of pay and safer staffing. In doing so, I'm pleased to say that they managed to agree more palatable shift pattern, a guarantee of working at least 75% of their designated base and would get compensated to have to work an emergency shift. Now, although these workers were able to achieve this, the need to continue to cut costs and deliver services for less and make a profit has meant that issues still continue. And they are still fighting the changes in their working patterns, still fighting how much work they're having to do on a daily basis. And there's a cost not just to themselves, but also to patients, which people I find are hiding and brushing under the carpet. So the other wholly owned subsidiary that I'm working in currently is Essentia, which is part of Guy's and St Thomas's. Now they employ workers like domestic workers, porters, security staff, and also engineers, food service assistants, and a rapid response team who deal with highly infectious diseases. Now we have had some wins over the last couple of years where we have security staff have won an abandoning of their role, and rapid response workers who were out on strike last year have now got a rest room in Guy's Hospital. Now, these rapid response, I've got to point out, deal with highly contagious diseases and decontaminate areas, make it safe for all of us to walk in and out of. So it's quite a specialised job in that sense. However, the fight for them still goes on for pay and a rest room in St Thomas's. And we are also organising the rest of the staff on issues with bank shifts. Now, historically, Trust used to use agencies when they were short-staffed and pay permanent employees overtime for doing extra hours. The Trust now, through the back door, I feel, slowly created their own bank workers, their own sort of in-house agency, where they now fill vacancies with staff that they call bank workers, and they give bank shifts out. And employees, permanent employees, have to register for this, so they've stopped paying overtime, which is a complete change. It's in breach. We've argued it a number of times. It's in breach of the terms and conditions of NHS workers. But, you know, they've done this, I feel, through closed doors. It's crept in slowly. We haven't been on the ball, and they've been allowed to continue to do that. Now, Essentia is actually what they've done in the recent months have reduced the number of hours they give per shift in order that they don't have to give half an hour break times to these workers. Absolutely appalling. They also have looked at who they've given the bank workers for and not having a fair and equitable way of allocating the shift workers, the shifts that they normally do. But what is most important is that they've got a high number of people on on bank shifts rather than permanent workers. So what that means is because these people are predominantly migrant workers, they have a lot of responsibility. They are more vulnerable because they're not on permanent contracts. They are actually very fearful to even raise and challenge the issues that are going on. And it's quite sad that when you speak to them, they're absolutely in dire need for support, but feel too scared to even say there is something wrong. And I was in the hospital yesterday, and it's like you're going around a corner and having a quiet chat because they didn't want to be seen to be talking to the union. And it's quite heartbreaking when you listen to their stories. Now, we are continuing the fight, and Essentia have also taken away meal vouchers for the food service assistants who do long shifts. They used to give them a meal voucher. They've taken that away as well. And they've reduced the number of weeks that these workers can take leave. As I said, predominantly migrant workers, they need to go back home. They used to be able to go for 6 weeks. They've now said nobody's allowed to go for more than 4 weeks, which again is really difficult for them because they go to visit their families. A lot of them, their families are back home, and it becomes more difficult. When I walk around these hospitals, I see really tired faces, and I look at them and I think, how have we got to this stage? Why is it that we've got these workers, the lowest paid within our NHS trust, being treated in this way? And I think we have a responsibility, and we have allowed this to happen. We haven't been vocal enough, and we need to do more. Now, in terms of the issues, they are always going to be ongoing, and I think the only way we can fight them is by trying to help workers organise. But in terms of the Essentia lot, watch the space. I'm sure you'll be hearing from us in a few months' time. We are going to be balloting them, and hopefully, we will get somewhere with them. But whilst these two examples I've given demonstrate what the dire need and support that these workers are in need of, What these two examples demonstrate is that the sheer concept of subcos is to cut costs in any way possible at the expense of the worker and also the patient. When you are overworking workers, ultimately there is a cost to the service delivery, which I have found is brushed under the carpet, as I said before, hidden, as it interferes with what the positive narrative that politicians like to give subcos be more effective. And as Guy said as well, we've not found anything in terms of why this is happening. And although Wes Streeting said last year, as Rathi, if it was Guy or Rathi who quoted, that they will only be proved in a limited number of circumstances and only where there's clear union support. I don't believe that, because I think mates will be able to do it just for profit and for gaining their own little empire. So I'll believe it when I see it, and I'll always be sceptical about that. And the only way I think we are going to resist subcos is by highlighting the issues with the politicians and with government, and also in terms of our members, but also the public. The public need to be aware, and I think people are not aware. We recently had a dispute of GFM members who are also cleaners within a mental health service, and that was a PFI. Millions of pounds are being given to this PFI on a weekly basis, and people are not aware of it, but their terms and conditions, their pay was below AFC, Agenda for Change workers. And there needs to be more awareness in terms of the public as to where the money is being spent. We need to do everything we can to stop this infestation. I call it an infestation because it is vile. It is vile, the way people are treated and the way it's crept in all over the NHS. We need to stop services being seen as profit-making entities. And ultimately, we need to force this and other governments who may come into power to invest in the NHS, stop dismantling it piece by piece, and restore the NHS to what it was meant to be, a free health service from cradle to grave based on need and not the ability to pay. Thank you.